Street Apologist. Street Apologist. Street Apologist. On the radio.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Street Apologist Live in the middle of the day. This is the show where we serve the underserved and look into the overlooked. Today is January 29th, 2020, Wednesday. It's 1:11. Sorry I got started late. I know it's cutting into some of your guys' lunch break. You'll be alright, though. You'll be alright. We had to do it now because tonight I'm speaking somewhere, and Mr. Stan Meyer, today's guest, is going to be doing something. You guys know there's a black screen. It's a blank screen. It's not going to last, though, because I'm going to show you our face right about now. Welcome to Street Apologist Live. How's everybody doing? Welcome, Stan Meyer. Thanks for coming on, bro. All right, this is your mic.
Hey.
And I'll control your levels, but you just get nice and close and comfy.
All right.
And you'll be speaking at Doctrine for the Block this year. Here's my lanyard already set to go. Got the schedule on the back. And we had to make it small on the schedule, your topic. So it just says on here, Jewish Christian speaks on the Messiah. But in the program, it's going to have more of the full title.
Great. Cool.
But I know there's been some changes recently in your ministerial walk, shall we say, Mr. Stan. But let's tell those people about you. There's your camera right there, and there's your mic. And I'll tell you if they make a comment that I want you to see, and I'll have you interact with it. But tell them about yourself, brother, because you got a lot of experience in this game.
Well, I grew up in San Antonio in a Reformed Jewish home.
So they're Jewish Calvinists, right?
Reformed? No.
Yeah, right?
Jewish communists?
I'm joking. I make that joke every time someone says that.
Oh, okay.
Reform. Anyway, sorry,
Reform,
go ahead.
That's okay. No, Reformed Jews, we were pretty active. We weren't very traditional. We didn't keep, kosher or keep all of the Sabbath laws or stuff. But we grew up in Texas, really knowing we were Jews. I mean, we were involved in our synagogue, very active. I was bar mitzvahed. I was confirmed. So grew up. My mom, her parents were immigrants, so she grew up in a very traditional Jewish home.
Okay.
But
Eastern Europe?
Eastern Europe, yeah. Grandmother from Poland, father from Russia, her father. Mm-hmm. But she never really knew much about having a relationship with God, and so she was always curious. I mean, she learned about tradition. She learned about what you do as Jews, but she never really learned much about having a relationship with God. So she, in the 60s, just went on this big odyssey and just tried experimenting with everything, the occult, New Age, psychic phenomena, all kinds of stuff. And she got into spiritual trouble. I mean, she got into just oppression from spiritual forces she didn't know anything about. And she reached out and, our Jewish synagogue didn't know what to do. And she ended up finding Christians who shared the gospel with her and said that Yeshua, Jesus, is our Jewish Messiah. And she prayed with them to receive Yeshua, Jesus, as her Savior, her Messiah, her sin bearer, and came home and began telling me what she found. She opened up our Bible. We had a Jewish Bible. We didn't really read it, but it was there. Mm-hmm. Showed me how Yeshua is in the pages of our Jewish Bible. And at 9 years old, I prayed to receive Yeshua, Jesus, as my Messiah and Savior. And my family was furious. I mean, my dad did not have a big celebration for this.
Right.
He said, you're not going to tell anybody about this. You're going to go to synagogue and get your education, and that's the end of it. And I thought, why do I need to tell anybody? I mean, it's none of their business. And so I'm just going to avoid all of this and just be a secret believer.
So you're part of the Jewish Insiders movement.
Yeah, that's right. Except I like to call myself a 007 Christian. It was more that. Because I didn't tell anybody. I mean, I didn't tell anybody. This is San Antonio, Texas, the Bible Belt. But I didn't let anybody know I believed in Jesus.
My name is Maya. Stan Meyer.
Like that. So, yeah. And I kept it a secret for years. And it wasn't until college. Actually, in college, I got involved with a really orthodox group called Chabad. These are the guys, you see them out sometimes.
Oh, so you were a Christian, but now you're getting involved with the proselytizing guys.
The Chabad people.
Yeah, they
Orthodox.
got the what's it called? The conversion vans. What are they?
Mitzvah mobile.
Mitzvah mobile. Yeah, mitzvah mobile. Yeah, I love that. Da 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 da. Yeah, the mitzvah mobile.
They are.
Okay.
So I got involved with them, not telling them I believed in Jesus, but everything in Judaism I learned about and experienced I just felt like it kept pointing me back to the faith that I had gotten from my mother years ago. It just seemed to make sense. Jesus really is our Messiah, and all of these things really point to that. And so I started kind of on my odyssey looking around, and I ended up getting involved with a group on campus, the University of Texas, called CRU, C-R-U.
Campus Crusade for Christ back then.
Yeah, they would call them Campus Crusade. The word crusade does not go over really good with Jews.
Yeah, there's a bad history there.
It does. So they went to go by CRU now. And I think one of the things that touched me was they said, you're Jewish and you believe in Jesus. And those two are not exclusive, mutually exclusive, not antithetical. You found your Messiah. And I said, wow, really? Yeah, you're a Messianic Jew, don't you know? And back then, there really wasn't a very big Messianic movement. I mean, I had Jewish people telling me, you're not Jewish anymore. And I had Christians telling me, stop saying you're Jewish, don't forget the book of Galatians. Galatians, And I thought, wow, I'm Jewish and I'm a fulfilled Jew. And I started growing. I went to Bible study. I learned about what it meant to be a Messianic Jew. And I discovered a group called Jews for Jesus.
Yeah.
And I came on staff.
That movement goes back all the way to the first century.
The 32 AD, give or take a year. Yeah. And I came on staff with Jews for Jesus in 1985, and I've served for 35 years with Jews for Jesus.
Mark Cleveland has an interesting comment, brother. Look, I put it on the screen here. That's what people are seeing there. I can make it a little bit bigger. It says he was one of those who believed privately among the Pharisees.
I guess so. I was pretty private about the whole thing. I had to kind of get pushed out of the whole thing. I had a Christian friend at CRU, at CRU, who started sharing the gospel with a Jewish person on campus, and he happened to go to Chabad, and he wanted to argue with her. And she said, well, I have a friend who's Jewish, and he believes in Jesus. Maybe he can answer your questions. His name is Stan. And he says, Stan, oh, yes, I will have a talk with Stan. And that's when my cover was blown. I tell people that's when I came out of the closet with Yeshua.
Well, there's the next question. That's funny. What? You said that. Now we need to clarify, everybody. This is in relationship to his faith in Jesus as Messiah.
Yes.
So how long was how long were you the secret agent, man? For what, like 10 years or so?
No, from age 9 until age 19.
That's 10 years. I just said that.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm just helping him out with his testimony, guys.
Is.
Math isn't his strong suit. No, but we first met actually at seminary.
Yeah.
And so, just so you guys know, Stan and I have known each other for a while. But Stan, he's pretty busy. He's really active in ministry. He's really dynamic. And Andy's really pushing the academic side. And so the reason why I've really only been able to interview him once on a radio station here in town, 1360 KPXQ, one time, primarily because he's busy. He's doing a lot, and it's really awesome to see. And so he started with Jews for Jesus in 1985, and that relationship, as far as in official capacity, has continued over the span of a couple of decades.
Yeah, more than a couple of decades.
Yeah.
35 years. So I served with Jews for Jesus for 35 years. I was the director for the South Florida office and for the Southern California office. We ran some outreaches in Florida, California, and I actually traveled the country. We have a music group, and it was called the Liberated Wailing Wall.
Oh, really?
So we sang in churches and did Messianic Jewish gospel music, shared my testimony, did drama. We went overseas to Germany, Holland, England, and even South Africa. So it's pretty exciting.
That's pretty cool. Well, that's awesome. And now you are finishing up your academic work? I
am. So I left Jews for Jesus the end of December, and I'm finishing my dissertation at Biola University in intercultural education. My dissertation is on Jewish millennials and the new spiritual communities that they're attracted to. So there's a whole big wide range of new independent communities that attract Jewish young people. Some people would say they're kind of new agey. They involve the Kabbalah, a lot of new contemporary thinking. It's very interesting because this generation is going to shape what American Judaism will look like. So I'm studying it, and that's what my dissertation is on.
But this man also studies ancient Judaism. So if you've been with Street Apologist, the name of the program, the show we do here for a while, you guys know that the last 2 Novembers, I've went with the A-Team, or if you want to call them the Apologetic Avengers, David and all those jokers, to ETS, the Evangelical Theological Society Annual Meeting. And this year I actually went into a room, and I was in the back, and then Michael Brown and Stan were in the front, to the Jew first and to the Gentile second. So they were the front row, and I sat in the back. And he gave a talk that Michael Brown complimented. It was a really good paper, really good talk he did with a PowerPoint and everything, because a lot of these guys, when they present these academic papers, God bless their souls, they're so dry. But Stan, he brought the fireworks. Not only did he have good content, good paper and relationship, specifically to Second Temple and ancient Judaism and the literature and what you can find. He's going to talk about that a little bit right now. But my point is, it was cool to see him in an academic context doing great work as well. And so you're also really studying this issue of, did anybody expect a God-man, a divine Messiah? And your answer has been surprising people, because your answer is not no, like people often will say, sometimes even Christians. Mm-hmm. And you're like, not so fast. And you're going to talk about that at Doctrine for the Block. But here, we could do a teaser.
Yeah.
So, you guys want to hear Stan Meyer's evidence, some introductory evidence as to why we can know that it is not the case so simple that no Jews thought that the Messiah was going to be divine. There were. So let's talk a little bit about that, bro.
Sure. Well, if you talk to most...
It's all you, bro. You tell me if you need the Bible, I'll read you a passage. You just tell me what to do, man.
No, let me just take it from here. So if you ask most Jewish people why they don't believe Jesus is the Messiah, I mean, after they tell you, it's not Jewish to believe, we're expecting a different Messiah, most Jewish people will tell you, first and foremost, we don't believe the Messiah is going to be a God-man, a divine being. We have one God, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, one God, and there is no Trinity. And it is impossible to believe that God could actually become man. Judaism never taught that. And going back, some 1,200 years, that's been what's been maintained for a really long time.
Standard polemic against Christian acceptance for Jesus as Messiah.
It is. The Jewish community said that for a very long time. And on top of that, mainstream Christian scholars today and historical scholars will go on to tell you, because Jews did not expect a divine Messiah, the whole theology of a divine Messiah in Christianity must have evolved over 100 years after Jesus was around.
Like it was a pagan idea.
Right, and they actually have a name for it, so you should know. It's called Christology from below. Christology from below. It's the idea that they could not have prayed to Jesus or believed he was a divine Messiah. It must have been some kind of mixture of pagan belief, like Hercules. Zeus had relations with a woman, and you have baby Hercules come out, a god-man, and this is all very Greek and pagan.
Baby Hercules! Wasn't that in... Isn't baby Hercules in Professor... what's his name? Eddie Murphy, when he's real big?
Yeah, something like that.
Isn't it baby Hercules? Baby Hercules. Yeah. Okay, I'm so sorry.
That's
about
all
that.
right.
You just said baby Hercules.
But you have the superhero, the superhero stories, and so there's this whole idea that it must have been pagan. It must have been an import. There's nothing Jewish about a divine Messiah, and so today, Dan Brown and his Da Vinci Code and his other books have popularized the notion that, well, you need a kicking boy. You need someone to point the finger at, and Constantine is a really good kicking boy to pick out. So in one of the movies, Dan Brown, you've got this whole scene, the animated scene of the Council of Nicaea.
They show it like it's an MMA fight.
Yeah.
They're in there like,
and they're all arguing, and you have this vote, is he God? And, the Jewish people don't raise their hand and the Gentiles do, and
the eyes have it.
The eyes have it, and they voted the doctrine in at 325 AD, and so you have this idea. Well, So that's what I think most people are thinking, and it is so far from the truth. Now, as we're looking at more pre-Christian literature, pseudepigrapha, apocrypha, Dead Sea Scrolls, books and manuscripts that are coming to light, the light is showing on pre-rabbinic literature that, holy cow, there was a lot of Jews who totally expected a divine Messiah. So even Bart Ehrman, author of Misquoting the Bible and author of How Jesus Became God, admits in How Jesus Became God, in his beginning, chapter 2, he says, when he started out writing this book, he too was expecting to write about the deity of Jesus being a belief that emerged, generations later. And looking at this literature is forced to step back and say, no, there really was an expectation of a divine Messiah. And he had to rethink his own theology. Now he says it must have been the very early Christians, right after the resurrection, that embraced this, but he had to admit there's too much there. So what my paper at ETS was about, and if you come to hear me at Doctrine on the Block, what I'm going to talk about is the fact that there are evidences in early Judaism that there was plenty of Jews who believed in some kind of a divine Messiah. There's a Messiah up in the heavens, sitting on a throne with divine powers, that it wasn't something that was alien to Judaism. And if nothing else, Rabbinic Judaism, which didn't really come about until after 100 AD, sought to censor and suppress these other strains of Judaism that were around in a reaction to Christianity, and to say these are no longer a part of what we would accept in the pale of Judaism. And they censored it quite effectively. And so we don't see it anymore for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Which is kind of a similar move, it seems like, to what you see, frankly, in some of the theological movements within the history of Judaism in general. For example, Maimonides' articles, it could be, I think, argued that there's stuff in there that's directly written to be specifically in opposition to Christian understanding of things, perhaps. Have you ever heard, do you think there's evidence to that? Meaning you see this kind of impulse going on and on. I've heard now, so some of this I haven't confirmed, that is it true certain passages are left out from the daily readings in the synagogue, for example? I've heard evidence of that. Things along those lines.
There is. I mean, Isaiah 53 is deliberately left out of the regular prophets' readings. But I know where you're trying to go with this, and that is people want to think Judaism evolved as, like they say, the parent religion of Christianity. Christianity, people, want to think, didn't Christianity come out of Judaism? Most scholars, including if you go over to ASU and take a course in Jewish history, or really even at any of the institutions, will tell you today, Judaism and Christianity evolved as siblings. Judaism evolved in response and conversation to Christianity. If Christianity says there's a Trinity, then Judaism says God is indivisible. If Christianity says we needed a blood sacrifice, Judaism evolved to say we never needed a blood sacrifice. And so they will reread the passages to say that. If Christianity says that the Hebrew scriptures say we all have a sin nature, then Judaism evolved to say no longer. No, we don't believe that. We have a good inclination and an evil inclination. Think a little devil on your left shoulder and a little angel on your right shoulder. Those inclinations. But we were not born with a sin nature. And so the beliefs of Rabbinic Judaism evolved. And it evolved in response in many ways to other religions. So, and most scholars will tell you this. This isn't a secret. I've, talked to the head of Jewish studies over at ASU, and she in her class on Judaism, telling her students that it is a sibling. Think of Judaism as a sibling because they both came into being at the same time.
Yeah, interesting stuff. So, BK Apologist, that's a man from Brooklyn. That's why he's got BK in his name. He says, sounds like Meyer and Heiser would hit it off.
Heiser.
Michael Heiser.
Oh, yes.
He hangs around ETS sometimes. You can see him
Yes.
traversing the hallways, as it were. So, what's some of the evidence? You know, this is only a teaser. You can't bring in everything. But what's maybe some of the evidence that you would say, here's some places you can look? Would you start with scripture passages that should be understood a certain way? Where would you kind of give people so they can understand what you're saying?
There's lots of Jewish scriptures in the Jewish Bible that all talk about what I would say the deity of the Messiah, Isaiah 9:6 and Psalm 22 and even Psalm 2. But the question has been, just because those are there in the Jewish Bible, how did Jews at the time of Yeshua understand it?
Right.
In other words, to quote the Watergate hearings, what did the president know and when did he know it?
Right.
What did the Jewish people think about those things?
For
That's
to
the
us,
question.
a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. So that's one dimension.
Exactly.
So how did they interpret that?
Well, so, the passage right there, it says his name will be Almighty God, and the word there,
El Gabor?
El Gibor, and Isaiah uses it elsewhere earlier to refer to God himself. They will return to God. He calls him El Gibor. That is a name of God. The rabbis since then have said, no, it's just a title. God is in many titles, and they said that doesn't prove that God's going to be born. It just means that he has a title that has God's name in it.
Jehovah's Witnesses still say that kind of stuff today in regards to this.
I think one of the most powerful passages that I go to is Daniel chapter 7.
Okay.
Because in Daniel chapter 7, you have Daniel seeing a vision, and he sees one like the Son of Man coming in the clouds, and the Son of Man is given a throne by the Ancient of Days. So clearly you have, the Ancient of Days, no doubt about that, that's God he's talking about. And then he says that the Son of Man, one like a Son of Man, comes, this glorious, divine-looking being, takes a throne and sits on a throne in heaven, judges the world, and it says he receives worship. Now,
I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a Son of Man, and he came to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed.
Yes. Now, if you need more evidence that that's talking about a person having divine status, number one, the whole term he is given a dominion that will never end is only used in Daniel to describe God, but the word for serve is really not the word serve, it's pelach. It means worship. It's an Aramaic word. It's only used in the book of Daniel and in other books to refer to worship. It's used in later rabbinic books, pelach, meaning worship. So basically, you have a divine being. He has a divine appearance. He judges the entire world. He comes in the clouds of heaven as this glorious being. He is given the eternal dominion, which only God has, and he receives worship. Now, there you have a problem. Someone other than God up in heaven receiving worship, what do you have? And so this theme was picked up in the intertestamental literature, specifically the book of Enoch. The pseudepigraphic book of Enoch goes on to create this very lengthy narrative of him and calls him God and says he receives worship, he forgives sins, and he's an everlasting person.
This is how intertestamental Jewish literature, specifically Enoch, describes the Son of Man figure in Daniel 7. And so what you're saying by that is, not that we accept Enoch as canon, but this is evidence, everybody, that there are Jewish folks in between, in a manner of speaking, depends how you want to tally this out, but Malachi and Matthew is one way to say it. In between that period, there are Jewish folks who recognize this Son of Man figure is divine in his person and nature, activity, and responses he's given.
Yep, exactly. That's not the only intertestamental evidence. There's other pseudepigraphal books, where again you see the same language used of somebody divine up in heaven. But I think what's really interesting is that when you skip ahead to the Talmud, now the Talmud was not written until 500 AD, so it's very late. However, it cites sources from the 1st and 2nd and 3rd century. You see these repeated references to those people who held to two powers in heaven. Two powers in heaven. And if you go to, say, Sepharia.org, which is a website that's kind of an open source of all the rabbinic literature, and you just Google the word two powers, you'll see an extensive amount of references in the Talmud of these polemics, the rabbis fighting with those who they call the two powers cult. So, which indicates there was a significant amount of Jews who continue to believe in a divine being in heaven, Daniel, and there was an asserted effort by the rabbis to suppress this group. So there was a book by a guy named Siegel called
Alan Siegel,
Two Powers in Heaven, in which he goes and basically surveys this different literature and says...
was one of the powers Austin Powers? I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, baby.
So you've got, this extensive cult that continued on into the first even into the 2nd century, that they were trying to suppress, which indicates that Daniel 7 wasn't lost on the Jewish people.
Excellent. Okay, now, what you're going to do, though, at Doctrine for the Block is give more examples of more sources,
right,
and go into more detail about them.
Yep.
So if I am an apologist interested in defending the deity of Christ and those kind of matters, and I come to your session, what hypothetically, if I pay attention, should I kind of walk away understanding,
So if you come, I'm going to give some of the examples of these documents, some of the texts that were around before Jesus, some of the early Jewish texts. But what's I want to encourage you is these are not obscure texts that you have to travel, say, to Hebrew University in Jerusalem to find copies of. They're online. All of this stuff is widely available electronically, both through places like Sepharia.org, open source documents. All of the documents and the text of early Judaism today have been made easily accessible on the internet. You can read it for yourself, use it, and if you're trying to share the gospel or make a case with a seeker or inquirer, I can give you the tools where you can have this stuff in your hand, read it yourself, and say, here it is.
That's excellent. So 2020, plans for ministry, hopes, goals, visions, dreams. People like what you're doing, want to find out more about it. What should they expect? What are you hoping and praying for? What else is popping off for Stan Meyer in 2020 by God's grace? Sure.
Well, I'm finishing my dissertation by May and hoping to defend by the end of May at Biola University and have my PhD. I started a ministry locally called Tree of Life Ministry. And give them our Facebook, or do you want to put it up there?
Sure. What is it?
Ministry.
Oh, okay.
Phoenix. There it is. That's our site right now.
All right, awesome.
And so we have a site. We started a ministry. Our ministry includes meeting with seekers one-on-one to answer their questions and to be able to help new believers who are struggling with questions that they have, their families pose to them, strengthen their faith. I speak in churches on a variety of different things, including deity of Messiah in the Old Testament, the cross of Christ in the Old Testament, different things like that. And looking to possibly adjunct teach in some of the Bible colleges.
Around here, or are you thinking of moving, bro?
Here, online, or local schools in the area.
Well, we got Arizona Christian University.
Mm-hmm.
We got Grand Canyon University.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's one called Wayland or something like that. Baptist?
There is, yeah. Wayland International.
It used to be called Golden Gate, but I forget the name now.
No, that's a different gateway. That's
I'm saying two different ones.
They
I mean,
are.
yeah. There's
Gateway.
they're
They have
like
an
Southern
extension
Baptist affiliated school here.
Yep.
Yeah. Of course, Phoenix Seminary. That's all I can think of. Oh,
Arizona Christian.
No, we said that one, didn't we? The American Indian Bible College on Sunny Slope. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
It's I think primarily affiliated with Assemblies of God, but pretty cool people down there.
Great.
I think it's called American Indian College.
Okay.
That might be, but it's a Bible college for your school, and some of those folks go on because I think it's accredited to go on and get their they might do other stuff. Anyways,
Great.
well, it'll be
Thanks.
interesting to hear about that journey.
Yeah.
All right, well, so guys, check this out. We're gonna try to call Rich Astone and see if he answers. Now what I'm gonna do is see if you have just a few minutes, brother.
Mm-hmm.
See if they got any questions for you.
Yeah.
So you might hear some Skype ringing here, guys. So I'm trying to call my buddy, and I have not figured out how to eliminate the Skype calling thing. Ooh, it's so loud. Let me turn that down. I'm sorry. I can't turn it down. I'm so sorry, man. Let's see. Why is it being like that? Sometimes this is what happens in the middle of a show. Rich Astone, are you with us?
I am with you.
Ho! All right. I should ask you this beforehand. Are you going to be able at any point to show your face?
I can. I just hit the wrong button when I logged in here.
All right. All right. So check this out. We got Rich up. So what we've been trying to do is what I called this show today is history and apologetics, and the idea here was to show that understanding some historical context about different apologetic issues is important and helpful. And so today we saw, with what you talked about, the history of Judaism, Second Temple stuff, some other movements is relevant. You're getting into these extra biblical but historical sources, and it's important. Now we got Brother Rich. You're going to bring him up. He's also going to be speaking at Doctor for the Black Stand,
Okay.
and he's going to be talking about Augustine.
Okay.
And so he's going to help us understand how it's important to learn about history as it relates to theology, apologetics as well. So we're going to talk to him. So this is a 2-for-1 today.
Great.
So here's what I'm going to do, bro. Rich, just give me a second. You guys got any questions? Anybody before he jams out? Because, well, you can stick around. You don't have to. But, I felt like you said you had to go at a certain time, too. Depends what you want to do.
Let me stick around for
All right.
a few minutes.
All right, that's awesome. All right, so I don't see any.
I can stick around for some questions from the viewers.
Okay, let's see how quick you can do questions. We have one guy, Shannon Murphy,
Yeah.
who's not. I don't have a specific question, but he has been speaking nonstop, saying, "Why do some Christians deny the prophethood of Muhammad?" Because Shannon seems to believe he was a prophet. Quick reasons on your response to that kind of question for Shannon.
Well, Shannon, I'd be curious to find out what your opinion is of Muhammad's, how do I say this, his ethnic cleansing of the Jews of Mecca. I know my Jewish history, and there was a very large Jewish community in Mecca, and I think he ordered the women and the children and all of the families killed. And today there's no Jewish community in Medina, Mecca, or any of that area left.
So I think one thing you're saying is
so I'd say
it'd be odd for a prophet in the line of Moses and Jesus to kill all the Jews.
I mean, I as a Jew, I have a difficult time embracing Muhammad in any kind of authoritarian capacity when there is this history of him just completely wiping out thousands of Jews of Mecca and Medina. I just, no matter what you think about him, I have a hard time saying, gee, that man must be from God.
All right, so there's a question for you. Someone else, I don't know if they were asking me, but since someone seemed to be asking if you'd be interested in debating a Hebrew Israelite.
I don't know. I'd have to think. I'd have to talk to you a little bit since that's your area.
Oh, Shannon responded.
Yeah.
In the Bible, there was killings of foreigners.
That doesn't mean it was right. And that doesn't justify killing all of the Jews in Mecca and Medina.
Well, you don't mean it wasn't right. Like, are you saying it wasn't right to kill the Amalekites?
I'm simply talking about, is it okay to follow Muhammad? I mean, if I met an Amalekite today and he said to me, I have a really hard time following Joshua. You want to call Joshua a prophet? He killed out, many of the Canaanites. I'd say to him, I can see your point. I see why you would think that. I have a really hard time following Muhammad. He killed just thousands of Jews of Mecca and Medina, and when he invaded Palestine and took it over, and it just he doesn't. He has a bit of a bloody history with my Jewish people.
Well, that is true. If you want to know some apologetic understandings on issues, this is related a little bit to what's being said about violence or warfare in the Old Testament. We have done 2 or 3 shows relating to that about ethical issues in the Old Testament. One actually with our mutual friend Jeff Cran. And so we've discussed this. I did another one with Jeff Durbin one time. We talked about the bears and a little bit different, but some of these types of issues we've talked about and discussed before. Clay Jones, we talked about what sometimes people call the Canaanite genocide, which I would call the Canaanite judgment. And here is the last question. It has a certain... you have to take it how you want as far as how you interpret it. Do you see the time of the Gentiles coming to an end soon? And then we're going to bring on Brother Rich.
Sure.
You have anything you want to say to that?
So for our listeners, there are many Christians who believe that the period of time after the cross they call it the time of the Gentiles. It's the time when God's focusing on bringing in the non-Jewish people into his covenant. Because when you read the Old Testament, you see God working with Israel. You see God raising up prophets in Israel. And after the cross, you see the gospel, a relationship available to everybody, Jews and Gentiles. And so some people will call that the time of the Gentiles. Other people call it the time of the church. There's different times of it. One thing the Bible does say, the Jewish scriptures say, that the time will come when God will regather the Jewish people from the ends of the earth, and that the Jewish people will come into a deep relationship, a personal relationship with their God through the Messiah. I see that happening. You see an impossible historical thing happening, that the Jews scattered across the face of the earth are being reconstituted in the land of Israel. You see a land, and you see Jewish people coming into a personal relationship with God through their Messiah, Jesus. And if you go back, 50, 60 years, and you talk to a Jewish person, and you say, what do you think of Jesus? Most Jews 60 years ago would tell you, there are no Jews who believe in Jesus. Well, there were, but they didn't know about them. It's not anything they knew. Today, you talk to Jewish people, particularly here in Phoenix, New York, LA, most Jews will say, I've heard of Jews who believe, Messianic Jews, or I even have a friend or an in-law who's one of you guys. Today, you see maybe 350,000 Jewish believers in Jesus in North America. That's remarkable. I have to say, whether you want to call it the times of the Gentiles or the church age, or whatever you want to call it, clearly something new is happening. Jews are coming to believe in Jesus. God is returning to the Jewish people, restoring them in the land, and that is evidence of a real God in heaven, and it is evidence of a supernatural aspect of the Bible.
All right, brother. I appreciate that very much. Well, you're going to get to meet our next guest. He's in the Phoenix area, but he is a little bit far out, so he's going to be joining us today right now through Skype. And I've known this brother for a while. He's kind of a polymath. They say, maybe another way to say that is a Renaissance man. And interestingly enough, one thing you just brought up, he is a quite adept at teaching people about Holocaust history. That's one of his areas of speciality. Now, that's not what he's going to be speaking about at Doctor for the Block. He's going to be talking about Augustine, and I appreciate him and his work and the time I've known him very much. And let me go ahead and unmute you, brother, and thank you very much for your patience and joining in the middle of the day. I feel like I should be calling you professor. You've taught college in so many different kinds of classes for so long, but either way.
That was years ago.
Oh, okay. Well, welcome to Street Apologist, Rich Astone. How you doing, bro?
I'm doing okay. I appreciate you pulling me into this. I haven't been in this kind of mode in several years. I've shifted into business mode for the last several years, but it's fun to have a chance to get back into the books and hopefully share some stuff that's educational, inspirational to others, and encourage them to continue exploring some of these ideas and hopefully help them pursue an approach to life that is God-seeking and one that also wants to elevate those around them as well.
That's excellent. Well, I've given a little bit of your bio. We don't want to necessarily dwell on it the whole time because you have a ton to talk about, from your linguistic abilities to your travels. But you said you've been interested in apologetics since you were really young. And so what's a little bit of your journey to kind of this point and this place in your life, Brother Rich?
Well, I became a Christian when I was 14 through a high school ministry, and prior to that, I was kind of a little nerdy kid. I was actually taking college classes at night from the age of 12, and
okay.
What often goes along with that is a certain kind of intellectual pride.
Yeah.
And Augustine struggled with this as well. So that's one of the ways in which I can really relate to Augustine.
Did you also steal? Did you also steal from your neighbor's fruit trees?
I did not.
Oh, okay.
Well, I don't think I did that.
Confession time. Confession time.
But so I was a little bit of a nerd, and often there's a pride that gets associated with that, and I think I was a little steeped in that. And I was as a kid, I was reading about Einstein. I read Origin of Species, not claiming that I understood too much, but I was in that mode partly because that's the mode I was supposed to be. That was the only thing I really saw that I had of that represented as a kind of worth in my life. Because otherwise I was kind of a scrawny kid, a messed up home life. So I kind of hung to that. But when Christ found me, what was really interesting in my experience, none of that previous thought regarding evolutionary theory or the atheism that's often associated with the pursuit of science, I would say wrongly so, if you understand the roots of science, none of that hindered my belief in Christ at all. It was almost just like it was obviously true. So I think it was a work of God, obviously, where God just spoke truth to my heart. But what I found fascinating after that was that I could go back, and then from a Christian point of view, I was seeing how other Christians were starting to recapture and retell the narratives that were dominated by atheists in the field of science, for example. And their explanations seemed to make a lot more sense. And not only that, they were more relevant to living a life where you had value and worth ascribed to you by God, rather than just being a cosmic accident, which is essentially the worldview of an atheist. And so I was really fascinated and got very engaged in that. I was also very interested at the time in engaging with cults, and so I got very involved in study of Mormonism. And I used to have Mormons come to my door, and I'm not this clever anymore. I've forgotten almost everything I knew, but they used to go back befuddled, and then send church elders to come talk with me, and they never got me. And I remember I even wrote, I think it was my senior English paper. I actually wrote it on Mormonism as a cult. And I was kind of an autodidact, but not a very disciplined student. That did improve Christian, but I remember ditching class so I could spend more time working on that paper. Probably because I didn't monitor my time earlier on as much as I should have.
So you
but I remember being very
played hooky to write an essay. All right.
Played hooky to write an essay. Yeah, that's about as nerdy as you can get, I guess.
I remember one of the first times we were hanging out. I'm trying to remember what the context was. I do not remember, but it was you, me, Dave went, and there was a super smart Mormon guy there. He was one of the more He was a younger guy. I think he was going to maybe be going away to the military. I can't remember. But he was kind of one of your buddies at the time. And it was interesting because I was really studying the Book of Abraham at the time. And so I was asking him questions about really what defines translation and how the Book of Abraham and the evidence that comes from later on. We see what Joseph Smith had in his hands as part of the one of the Egyptian scrolls that was actually the Book of the Dead. And it was very interesting. He had this whole kind of apologetic worked out for it, which basically resulted in, well, Joseph Smith essentially looked at the facsimile or whatever. I'm not sure if I'm using that word in the correct context, but the hieroglyphs. He looked at those, and then essentially was inspired to write the Book of Abraham. It's not translation in the traditional sense. Anyways, I remember all that. Do you remember that guy? And that I think we were at Taco Bell or something in Mesa.
I vaguely remember. I don't trust my memory much anymore. It's I think I've overused the neurons in my brain, and they're kind of rebelling at times.
Someone wants to know on the live chat, brother. Does Mr. Astone? I always mispronounce your last name, so help me out. But does Mr. Astone?
Astone.
Okay. Does
Astone.
Mr. Astone know Japanese?
I can get by with some basic Japanese. I did about a year and a summer studying abroad in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
When I went back to college later in life, because I started when I was 12. I never finished. I joined the Marines and traveled the world, and then did some Christian work for a while. But when I went back to college, I started out studying philosophy. That's what I was most interested in. But then I was seduced by East Asian language and literature, and kind of took a rabbit trail down that road for a while. And one of the things that attracted me to Japanese is it kept kicking my butt. It was a very difficult language, and I kind of like challenges. I never cared about GPAs, so I kept on hitting it, and didn't pick it up as fast as others, especially since, I'm not really into manga or anime, which most Japanese students are.
You like girls that are hard to get.
Yeah.
And that abuse you.
What's
I said you like ladies that are hard to get and abuse you.
Rich, I'm gonna have to go.
There you go, exactly.
I wanted to say it was a pleasure to meet you and thank you, thank you, Vocab.
Yes, sir.
And
be sure to grab those flyers.
I will. All right.
You guys will see each other Saturday. Let me look at the schedule just to see who will be doing what when.
Okay.
So. All right, just lock the door on the way out. God bless. Thanks for coming by. I'll give you a call later, brother. All right, we've got Stan Meyer is going to be the 10:30 session. He's going to be doing the 10:30 session here on Saturday, February 8th. And then Rich, you are. Let's see. Oh, you're actually going at the same time as him. You're also at the 10:30 session. So, guys, if you come to Doctor for the Block, you cannot hear both these guys unless you skip in and out. But either way, that's why we have them on now. So, the other languages you do, and then I want to get to Augustine. The other languages that you've messed around with, shall we say?
So, I picked up some Russian while I was doing ministry in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And that was fun. But that's, again, I'm forgetting more and more for lack of opportunity to practice.
Sounds fun. Russia is really known for being a fun language, yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's fun. And, when I was in the military, I was an intelligence analyst, so I studied a lot about Russian weapon systems and things like that. So it was a lot of fun to go over to that country back in 1993, right when the wall came down. And I was there for about a year, and just really, really great time in over there. And let's see, when I lived in Southern California, I was very interested in Chinese. When I was young, I really fell in love with stories about missions in China, especially Hudson Taylor, for example.
Oh, fascinating.
And when I was young, that's really what I wanted to do with my life, was become a missionary in Asia or China somewhere, because And in the Marines, I traveled to some Asian countries, and really that helped further develop my heart for other people and have an interest and a love in their language and their culture. So after the Marines, when I was in Southern California, I started to study Chinese. I had a lot of Chinese friends, and I found that I picked that up fairly well, but I didn't do too much formal study with that. So I know enough just to get somebody's attention. Let's see, I've dabbled in high school. I studied German for 4 years, and so I'm doing a little dabbling in Greek right now with David Wendt, our friend.
And so, guys, I just got to tell everyone right now, when you look at the schedule, not the program you're going to receive, but if you come to Doctor for the Block, if you look at the schedule on the back of this, you're going to see the name David Wendt for the class on Augustine, and that's because Rich Astone is a gracious substitute teacher, and he's doing the Augustine class. So same topic, just different, and it's cool because these guys are great buddies. By the way, shout out to Christine S for the super chat. Thank you, and Shannon. I feel like what do you think, Mod? Should Shannon be timed out for claiming that there's a scam going on? Mods, I'll let you decide. I kind of feel like that's timeout talk. Once you're talking about trying to get YouTube to take the channel down, I mean, that escalated quickly. Shannon, just because we were criticizing Muhammad in previous broadcasts is really, quite an escalation for you to say, oh, this is a scam and I'm going to get YouTube to take the channel. I mean, what's going on, bro? You know, I feel like that's kind of timeout territory. All right, I'm just talking to the live chat there. Okay, so with this, Rich, you have actually taught on Augustine, and let's give a teaser now for the class because Augustine, he's so important. He's so monumental, and I always just, I don't know if it's cool or not, but I bring out, often to try to remind people, hey, this brother hails from Africa. Doesn't mean we know what he look like. It's not about that, but I think it's important because sometimes Western Christians, I think, can really Eurocentric. They can have really Euro or ethnocentric eyes, and sometimes I just like to remind people we're the foreigners, and we're the latecomers as far as American Christians, and so I just like to remind people. But Brother Rich, how did you even get interested in this topic? To study Augustine so much.
Well, when I was about 14, I actually read Confessions. Again, I think probably motivated by some of that early intellectual pride. I'm supposed to read heady stuff, or so I thought, and I heard he was a great person to read. I can't claim that I understood too much at that age. Maybe I forgot what I understood, but I remember being very moved by his pursuit of truth and his wrestling and his seeking after truth, which is a large part of Confessions. It's basically his biography, his testimony of how God eventually reached him. But he went through several different belief systems in order to get there. But what underlied all that was this deep restlessness that he had. First, for the problem of evil, which I think, if we're honest, this is one of the deepest issues that we as human beings struggle with, both non-believers and believers. The oldest book in the Bible, the book of Job, not the first book, but the oldest, most ancient book, deals directly with this problem of evil. So I think it's something that obviously God knows we as human beings in our pride are going to struggle with trying to understand evil, both ontological evil that exists in the world, natural disasters, for example, but more importantly, moral evil, especially when we see, if we're blessed enough to see that evil inside of ourselves. And that's something that Augustine saw inside of himself. You referenced the pear stealing incident. That was something that happened when he was just a young boy, but it bothered him. It bothered him. Yeah, so stealing a few pears, what's the big deal? But what really bothered him, it wasn't that they needed the pears, and it wasn't that the pears even tasted good. They tasted nasty. It was he did it because it was wrong. And that really bugged him. And you see later on in life, he starts trying to understand, whence evil? Where does this evil come from? and that drew him into groups like the Manichees, for example, which had an explanation for evil, but it didn't address the issue of self-reform. How do I overcome it? It gave one enough information to maybe blame something else. Blame the qualities of darkness. The Manichees were dualists. They believed that everything was based on a war between the forces of light and dark, and that human beings were really light captured into a trap of darkness. And so that gave an explanation for where evil came from, but it does nothing to explain how to overcome it or how it is overcome. But getting back to what drew me into it. So even as a kid, I was really attracted to the sincerity of Augustine's journey. I think it's really easy for Christians in leadership, and certainly Augustine is recognized as a great leader, to fall victim to a kind of pride where you stop reflecting on yourself. And he was aware of that tendency. He was also aware of the tendency of people to put him up on a pedestal, and he warned against that. And you see this even later on when he writes his retractions. He's reflecting again on his thought, and he's revising things. He's not too proud to go back and look and say, maybe I got some things wrong. Maybe I need to clarify some things. But that really attracted me to Augustine. So then life for me took on some different directions, and I was involved in a lot of different things. Eventually wound up in the business world, and then around that time I actually went through a period of spiritual depression myself, and that was a rough time. And I was greatly blessed by a great church in Southern California that helped me to stay on my feet and keep pointing Christward. And then years ago moved out here. I finished some studies, got a master's degree at ASU in liberal studies, and my first job, before I even had that degree in my hand, I landed a job teaching philosophy in the Maricopa system, which is something that was kind of my intent. I really wanted to do that. I had become fascinated by philosophy when I was young. I had a philosophy class when I was about 13, and I found it very, very interesting. That instructor really didn't like Christians, and he had a sharp wit, and very interesting fellow. He taught at Glendale Community College for many, many years.
Is it Lee?
No, it's not Lee. This was Walcott, way before Lee.
Oh, okay. So you know who I mean when I say Lee, huh?
I've heard of Lee, yes.
I think he's kind of infamous at this point.
Right. But so I'd done some dabbling earlier on, and again I did some philosophical studies at ASU, but I did get distracted. Fascinated by so many things. So I did a lot of study in literature, both English literature, Japanese, Chinese literature, and also a lot of film studies, international Japanese, Korean, Chinese film, things like this, and then religious studies as well, Buddhism. I've always been fascinated by ideas. For me, people do not value ideas as much as they should. Ideas move the world. Countries are moved to war by ideas, and whether we're conscious of them or not, ideas form our worldview. And often we're not too aware of our worldview. It's kind of under the surface. And yet I find is to be thinkers, and especially for Christians, where God has given us a mind. And at one point he says, "Come, let us reason together." We have a responsibility to use our minds rightly. So we need to understand the ideas that undergird our worldview and inform the rest of our thoughts and our actions, especially when those thoughts and actions wind up impacting other human beings. So I've always been fascinated by the world of ideas, especially as they're expressed through literature and other forms of media, because that's where folks that may not have the luxury to do a lot of philosophical study, they're still influenced by these ideas as they're translated and percolated, so to speak, through books, comic books, film, and it has a profound effect on cultures over time. So I was really fascinated by those things. So the first job I got after after I got my degree was teaching philosophy.
And
I discovered I loved teaching.
You taught classes on Augustine though before. How was that walking?
Not specifically on Augustine. So Augustine would be part of my curriculum.
Okay.
And so obviously
in philosophy curriculum.
In the philosophy courses, yeah. So he's not just a great theologian; he's a great philosopher.
So how do you place him in there? You know, how do you come to him? Because, for example, I've heard him be called sometimes the first individual in history, the first Western man. These are things I've heard. I don't know. How do you end up placing him?
Sure. Well, he has a lot of different titles because, in a lot of ways, a lot of modern philosophical trends can find their roots in Augustine's thought. Everything from elements of Descartes' skepticism all the way to aspects of postmodern deconstructionism can find their roots in some of Augustine's thought. And Augustine himself, he places himself in this philosophical tradition because in his intellectual journey, the one belief system that actually prepared him for Christianity was the Neoplatonic thought of Plotinus. This is kind of a resurgence of old ideas from Plato, repackaged, and it solved a lot of intellectual problems for Augustine. He could not understand the concept of God that was everywhere. For example, he just could not wrap his mind around the idea of something that was truly transcendent. His previous mode of thought in Manichaeism was it was almost kind of a substance dualism. It was a dualism, but it was all very much this worldly. Although if you look at Manichaeism, there are some conceptual ideas in there. It's a very complex belief system that originated out of Persia. But Augustine just could not wrap his mind around what it meant for God to be omnipresent. He just could not conceive of that. But when he gets exposed to Plato's forms, and this happens when he gets to Rome, and there were a lot of Christian intellectuals that were also Platonists at the time, and he. Yeah,
I think even a lot of Christian intellectuals who wanted to decidedly be Greco-Roman influence in their thought, a lot of them, it seems like, still ended up being influenced by Platonism or Neoplatonism. For example, I think specifically, I'm going to say it's Origen, who has statements which clearly show he's trying to differentiate himself from the world, and he's really concerned about that, but it seems like you can detect elements of that thought, and really that just shows that these guys are imperfect just like us, and that you never really realize sometimes how culturally, contextually, chronologically located you are, and until maybe later, or you're dead and look back. It's very fascinating. But that's interesting about Augustine. I mean, I'll let you finish that thought, but I do want to make sure some biographical stuff we get to, and I don't know if you're going to be able to talk about this in class, but I don't know if it's relevant. But I almost feel like in some way you should sneak it in about his mother and
Monica.
Just how important she is. Because I don't think some
hugely.
people understand Monica's contribution. If there was no Monica, I think, this is all counterfactuals, right? But if there was no Monica, it seems like there would be no Augustine. I don't just mean birthing him, but who she was. It's amazing.
She was incredible. And you can, there is a palpable love that Augustine expresses in Confessions for his mother. So his mother, Monica's a Berber name, and so this is where we know that Augustine was at least partially Berber, and it's likely his father was a Berber as well. But we don't know that that was his ethnicity.
I never knew that. I never knew that Monica was a Berber name. Is
that's what came up when I was doing some studies, which by the way, my previous explorations of Augustine were more on had to do with Augustine from a philosophical point of view. You pulling me in to substitute here for David Went has really been great because it's challenged me to go look at other aspects of his life that I really didn't explore too much before. And so these are some things that were kind of newly discovered by myself. And if folks don't like the class, you can blame David Went. But no, David Went's awesome. But I'm trying to fill some big shoes. Anyhow, Monica is amazing. She was a Christian. Now, his father was a pagan. And his father kind of seemed to even just smirk when Augustine would, he'd be, running around hanging out with the guys, talking about and pursuing their sexual exploits. And Dad probably thought, hey, that's what young men should do. But his mother always encouraged him to pursue Christ. So in his early life, he would identify as a Christian. We might call it a cultural Christian, because that was the home that he grew up in under his mother. Now, later on, when he goes off to study in Carthage.
In Carthage, is Carthage in modern day Tunisia, or is that just Hippo?
I think Carthage. I think that's in. I got to be careful with my geography. I think it's in Tunisia. We might want to double check.
I'll look it up. Yeah, I was just curious. Because I'm trying to give people, because I think most people understand. Okay, Augustine, they associate it with North Africa, but some people don't know where. By the way, I don't know if you know. You're kind of nerdy, so maybe you do. the first Star Wars, A New Hope, released in 1977. My understanding is Tunisia, for the most part, is the location of the desert scenes. And I guess
that sounds familiar.
They were talking about temperatures in the midday that make Phoenix look like a picnic. Like, so it could get up to, I think, regularly 120s, and sometimes even hotter, where they had to stop, and just really wild stuff. But they did it on location there in Tunisia, is my understanding primarily.
Right. But what we do have to remember is back in Augustine's day, this region of North Africa, the Sahara was not as large then as it is now.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, the geographical,
I don't know what the temperatures were like.
The geomorphological changes. Yeah. Right.
At the time, North Africa was the breadbasket for Rome.
Oh, Carthage is Tunisia. I'm so sorry, but it is located in modern-day Tunisia, right. So that is correct. Which is
very close to modern-day northern Algeria, which is the region that Augustine is in, modern-day Algeria. When I say he's in, when he's born and later returns to his home in Tagasta, but he at one point after he gets involved with the Manichaeans, his mother won't let him in the home. She puts her foot down. She won't let him back in the home for a while.
What? Because she basically says you're in a cult, you can't come home. Is that it?
Exactly. She practices some tough love with Augustine at one point.
I knew she prayed for him. I knew she was known as a praying mother. I didn't know she was like that though.
She prayed. Well, and that was just one phase. But yeah, she was always praying. In confession, you can see there's God even gives her a vision that Augustine is going to come to the faith.
Yeah, and she kind of lived by that promise, basically.
She did. There's actually a fascinating little story in which both Augustine and his mother share a vision at the same time, which is just really fascinating. I think it's the only account I know of where two people simultaneously share a vision.
That's fascinating.
But there's an incredible amount of love there. But also Augustine could be he could be a little sly at times. So there's one fascinating part of the story where Augustine is on his way to Italy, and his mother's going to go with him, and he doesn't want her going with him. So he tells the ships aren't ready. I'll come get you when they're ready. And then he goes and gets on the ship and leaves her there.
He ditches his mom.
Yeah. Now she eventually catches up with him, and then she plays some games with him. So later on, Augustine he meets Ambrose. And
Ambrose of Milan, correct?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Ambrose, and he is shocked by Ambrose because here's a Christian who's also an intellectual.
Right. And I don't think he had met any like that. And he was also impressed with Ambrose, how erudite he was, his rhetoric. Because I heard a story of where he comes and everyone's like, hey, if you want to hear the best rhetorician around, you got to go hear Ambrose. So he's going in there just to hear his gift of his eloquent speech, and he's sitting there as an unregenerate pagan listening to his sermons.
Exactly. And one of the fun things that his mother does now, his mother, obviously, very few people would have the intelligence and the education of Augustine at this point in his life. He's highly trained at this point, and he's been the equivalent today of a very high level college professor. But so his mother, she clearly knows she can't intellectually argue him into the kingdom. But she does something kind of tricky. She goes, I've got these theological questions, and I think Ambrose can answer them. So she would send Augustine with questions to Ambrose, for Ambrose to give answers to her. But really what she's doing, she's setting Augustine up to spend more time with Ambrose. And they both could be a little sly. in their relationship with each other. But clearly, there's this really deep love, and we know it's deep because, and I cover this. I used to cover this in my philosophy courses years ago. One of the things that Augustine really struggles with in his philosophy and his theology is this concept of love. Trying to really make sense of love and trying to understand, why does it hurt so much when we lose someone close to us? So, for example, when his mother dies. And this helps him to develop this idea of right-ordered loves. And that the problem for human beings is not necessarily that we love the wrong things. There are things, he argues, that we can, in an appropriate measure, love in this world. You can love friends and you can use the things of this world. The problem is when we start looking to those things to give us our ultimate satisfaction. And we don't have our loves ordered rightly. Sort of now,
like it sounds like an embryonic form of the discussions about sort of idols of the heart and things along those lines, sort of Calvinistic, sort of Puritanistic, maybe even, I wonder how much influence Edwards, some of the things you're saying. Anyways, I'm just thinking of, it's very interesting strands of thought and how it influenced so many people. I mean, who's the biggest influence on the Roman Catholic Church and maybe the Protestant Church? You could argue both of them. It's Augustine. It's wild.
Exactly. For better and worse. There's perhaps a darker side to that as well. But that's another story. But Augustine would argue that our first love needs to be God, and with that as our higher love, then our other loves more easily fall into place. And we don't seek to use things and others for ways in which they were never meant to be used to satisfy our deepest needs. Only God can give us that satisfaction. But if we love God first, then we can love God through the love of others, with God as the ultimate end. And he also wrestled with why God would take his mother away. So again, the problem of evil was something that he really wrestled with, not in some abstract sense, but it was a personal struggle that he had. Why would God take his mother away? And this is something, again, this problem of evil to me is so crucial. I think especially for those involved in apologetics. A lot of folks have intellectual arguments, but when you get down to it, I think this is one that people really, really struggle with. This theodicy, this problem of evil. How can a good God allow bad things to happen? I remember meeting a young lady in a video store one day, and I don't remember how it happened, but the topic of God came up, and she said she quit believing in God. I said, "Oh, why is that?" She said, "Well, he let my grandmother die." It wasn't that she found some piece of information that persuaded her that Christianity was untrue. It was that something happened in her life that she didn't like. And if God's in control of everything, he must be to blame. And that to me is, there was an incredible amount of honesty there. At the same time, I think she's also lying to herself, and I think we all do that to some extent. That we go down a whole rabbit trail there. But this is something we all struggle with and wrestle with, even as believers at times. Why does God allow certain things in our lives? And it's one of the sources of suffering. And Augustine teaches that this kind of suffering is an opportunity for training that perfects us and drives us towards Christ. And at least on one level of comfort, Christ incarnate was no stranger to suffering. One of my favorite moments is, and it's perplexing, when Jesus on the cross says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Mm-hmm. And I don't claim there's an easy answer to fully comprehend that. But when I was going through my period of deep spiritual depression, that kind of that line was a beacon of hope to me. In this way, I used to think in that period of depression that I was going through, the spiritual depression, that I was abandoned by God. And yet when I read this, that Jesus also experienced this in some level. We don't know to what level. It's a mystery. How God could be, at least in the appearance in the text, it seems like God's rejecting himself, so to speak. It doesn't make sense to us from a Trinitarian point of view, but Jesus experienced something like this, and that showed me there was indeed no temptation, as the scripture says, that is not common to all men, and that Jesus himself did not share in all of those struggles. And so even that struggle, what you might think is the deepest of struggles, the struggle of thinking that God is not there for you, and that he doesn't care, he's not involved, even that Jesus relates to, and through the resurrection overcomes. And so that's our hope. And again, hopefully most people never deal with that kind of question, because it's a brutal thing to go through. But many people do, that struggle with the problem of evil. And again, this is something that really resonates with me with Augustine in his life.
I think the majority really do. I mean, we might be a little bit shielded to an extent here in the United States, but I heard a good interview by my brother Adam Coleman today on the True ID podcast, and I always mispronounce his name, but he interviewed, Doug Gruthice from Denver Seminary.
The philosopher,
Gruthius? Yes.
The theologian?
Yeah, and he experienced his wife's slow decline mentally as she got dementia, and then he wrote on it, and he wrote a book that is a lament, but it's also filled with hope, but it's not what you would call a happy or a fun book, because that wouldn't really make sense. But he's very, I think, good from applying Christian apologetics, theology, philosophy, but also to an extent some of his own personal experiences, and this idea of Christians should suffer well. And there's a theology to that, and Christians should also lament biblically and properly, and there's a way to do that. The American impulse might be to first of all shield ourselves from it, but then secondly move on. We're kind of okay on to the next thing. Okay, just move on. But that I don't know if that's the most healthy thing spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and also I don't think that's really a biblical model. So that's interesting. Now all that ties into a pretty famous quote, I think, by Augustine. Our hearts are restless until they find their rest in him. Exactly. That's the culmination of that thought, or those various threads of thought. God needs to be the center, because in one place Augustine describes our need as kind of an infinite need, and only the infinite can fulfill that need. Yeah, the Bible says in Ecclesiastes, I believe, that eternity is placed in our hearts. But yeah, I think that's good. Augustine is not only a towering intellect who's influenced church history, sometimes, especially if you study the area of Christian thought, the history of Christian thought, but also philosophy, Western civilization, Protestants, Catholics alike. I mean, it's quite amazing. And with all that being said, at the end of the day, he was very pastoral, I think. He wasn't just an intellectual. I think there was a kind of a burning passion in the way that he wrote, and I think there was really a pastoral sensibility in a lot of what he did. And I think maybe that's perhaps even where City of God comes from. How do we as Christians now deal with this problem of the collapse of the stability and security that we had known in the Roman Empire at that time? And what do we do? I think that was partially a pastoral impulse from my understanding of Augustine, so I appreciate that. But it's funny, we kind of skipped over this, but earlier in his life, before he came to the Lord, Augustine was a player. Oh yeah, he didn't just take pears that weren't his; he took women that weren't his. So scholars might disagree to what extent he was a player. In his heart, he certainly recognizes he was a player. He sees the sin nature that was there, especially when he's a younger man, hanging out with the other younger men. They're making up stories sometimes about their exploits with women, and they're pursuing women. I don't know that Augustine is
quite as rambunctious as people make him out to be.
Oh yeah.
He does, for example, take a common law wife, which we would call a common law wife. They refer to it as a concubine when he's in Africa. But he really loves this woman, and he's faithful to her for like 15 years. So it's not like he was looking for every chance to fool around. But he did see this tendency in his heart, and he also saw that when there was a situation that came about where his mother wanted him to marry into a wealthy family.
Right.
This and the fact that he needed some financial support to actually get his education tells us that even though his family name is an honorable upper class name, they seem to have been on hard times to some extent. I mean, not as hard as many people in that era, but there was pressure to get back into the good graces of society. In our culture, it's very individualistic. We may not be able to appreciate the importance of bettering your family situation through marriage. And this is something that his Augustine, he loves his mother, but he'll point out some of her flaws too. And she does seem to have a little bit of this worldly thread, and she wants Augustine to marry in to this wealthy family. The girl's not old enough, so he has to wait a couple of years. But part of the deal, he has to put away the wife he's been living with for 15 years. And he does that. And he writes about it. It's heartbreaking the way he writes about them. We don't know we don't know much about her, but the way he writes about her, it's like his heart is just broken. And he clearly was a very passionate person. There's several instances like this where you just see his heart breaking, when a friend dies, for example, when his mother dies. But his heart is broken when he has to send this woman away. And he struggles with the sexual habit. Because, from what I hear, sex is kind of fun, right? And he really enjoys it. And it's something created by God. And he struggles. And so even after he puts her away, and he's supposed to wait 2 years before he marries this other young lady, he takes another concubine. He just cannot break this lustful habit. And so he struggles with this. And this is again, one of the things that pushes him Godward, is this recognition of this struggle with inner desires that he can't seem to satisfy. So in that sense, yeah, he was a little bit of a player. In his younger years, apparently he did fool around, or at least talk with his friends a lot about fooling around. And he did have a couple of these concubines, but it's not like his heart wasn't desiring to be content with his first concubine, certainly. And later on, he actually, in the end, he decides not to get married at all. Apparently God gives him some freedom in that area, and he decides to pursue the life of singleness, and so he can devote himself to the contemplation and pursuit of God.
Right. No
and
doubt.
So he eventually does achieve some freedom there, and it's but again, that's an example of a struggle he has. Where all of us can relate to that. I think, especially in our culture that is so saturated with sexuality. Again, another way we see that Augustine is not elevating himself above other people. He's very real. He's very down to earth in spite of his great learning.
Right. No doubt. Yeah, I agree. And he ended up being a bishop there in modern-day Algeria, and that's usually the city he's associated with, Augustine of Hippo. Augustine of Hippo, yeah, that's there in Algeria. And you said his family name, Aurelius Augustinus Hipponensis. That's that I have here. What's the fancy name part that we know he was well off?
Oh, the Aurelius?
Is that what it is?
Yeah, so apparently that's actually the origin of that name goes to people who were freedmen, who previously were plebes, and then were elevated by an emperor's edict.
Oh, okay.
And so from what I understand, again, I'm not a historian, but I just preparing for some of this, I've been reading various sources to get familiar with his context, which is something I really wanted to do, get familiar with the context of his day and age and some of the controversies and some of the political issues going on in his day, to situate him and what was going on in his part of the world. So yeah, but apparently it was an honorable family name. There's and eventually there's an emperor that arises out of this clan as well. But again, we know he's not really well off. He's living in a small farming town. He's born in a small farming town, and he needs financial help to even go to school. He's not born with a silver spoon for sure. But people do recognize his talent and want to help him along.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, there's so much to say about him and all that. And I appreciate hearing more of what you say at Doctrine for the Block. And guys, you want to meet Brother Rich, you want to come hear his class. And he's just going to bring out some great stuff. And I'm very excited about it. Any questions? Because we got to get into our freestyle part of the show here for Rich Astone. He will be, like I said, at Doctrine for the Block, speaking on Augustine. And I don't know if you're going to be able to get to it in the class, but hopefully you can say a little bit about how, this man all the way who, died in the beginning of the 5th century, how he influenced the Reformation in so many ways, centuries later. It's quite fascinating. And so this is why apologetics is not just standing alone. It's in the context of the church, and there's a historical context. And knowing about Augustine certainly is very important. I mean, some people say right after you read the Bible, the next thing you should do is read Confessions. There's people who do say that. Yeah, I've heard that before. But yeah, he's got some awesome stuff. Final stuff, Rich. I'm so glad you're able to join, and then I'm gonna do some freestyles here because people request them. But final things from you, Brother Rich.
Well, again, I'm thankful for this opportunity to be able to use some of the learning that I've accumulated in life and being able to share that and hopefully bless others. I'm very humbled by it, and I don't feel up to the task, but I'll do my best, and hopefully God will bless it. If nothing else, I just want to point people towards the work of God in a great person in history, who wasn't without flaws, was very real, and yet was used mightily by God. Who knows what God can do in the hearts of those. When we look at the testimonies of other saints throughout history, I know that's helped me a lot in life when I look at the testimonies of various saints throughout history. So hopefully I can point folks in that direction as well. If folks are stimulated just to go do a little bit more learning on their own, then I'll be satisfied.
Amen. That's awesome. We'll do one question. We got to do this quick brief. I'll give my layman's answer, and then you give your expert answer there, brother. Someone's asking about, is it true that Augustine justified killing and torturing of non-Christians? Here's my understanding of that, because you already mentioned he's not perfect. So, first of all, a couple things to remember. This is not as if Augustine participated or did this that I have ever heard of. Like he was responsible in some way. He was a churchman ultimately. He wasn't a statesman in any way, or a politician, and so it's not like he did this or something like that. But in Augustine's writings, you see certain developments of thought, and at one time it seemed Augustine disagreed with this idea that the state should be used in any way to coerce or correct belief. And so I think a lot of this had to do with basically what to do with certain heretical forms, certain forms of heresy. Now, if you look at his own life, he went back and forth specifically with Pelagius, who was a British monk who was running around with doctrines that were antithetical to biblical anthropology and biblical harmoniology, which affects your understanding of biblical soteriology. Basically, some bad theology is what I'm saying by that. And Augustine's own theology became sharpened in the process of writing and these disputations against Pelagius. And I think his understanding became clear of grace and sin and the cross. in these disputations. So my point by bringing Pelagius into it is like, he didn't say, hey guys, let's go kill Pelagius, or let's go murk him, or someone needs to take him out. As far as what I know, I mean, as far as what he did, he wrote against him. But it seems like later on in another period in his life, and so, Rich, you may have to correct me on some of this. I'm trying to make you, I'm trying to give some of my perspective on this, because I think he's asking both of us here, is that it seems Augustine went backwards in his thought and said it would be okay or acceptable that the state should have some coercive power in relationship to belief. But even then, I don't think it was some kind of unbridled form or anything like that. And you got to remember, this doesn't mean it's okay or good or anything like that per se. I don't think. But Augustine was a man of his age, and sort of it would be difficult to go the other way, the idea that the state shouldn't do this, because mostly what people had seen was the state doing this in regards to whatever the belief at the time was. And ironically, of course, prior to that, it was Christians, kind of before Augustine's lifetime as far as the bulk of it. But it is what it is. So briefly on that, and by the way, there were some negative things, I think, where people used Augustine to kind of justify things later on, but that also doesn't mean Augustine would have co-signed all the nonsense that happened by people just saying, oh, well, Augustine approved this. That doesn't actually mean that that's the case. And so, there may have been a flaw in his thinking in that area. But, Brother Rich.
Okay. I'm going to give a little bit of a lengthy answer, but I think it's necessary.
Oh, no! Okay.
But I also want to preface this by saying I don't consider myself an expert on Augustine, and he wrote a lot. There's a lot that I have not studied firsthand yet. Hopefully, I'll be doing more. But I have looked into some of this just as through the natural course of my study. First thing I think we need to keep in mind: the Roman Imperium at this time had made Christianity essentially the state religion. The idea of the separation between church and state had not yet been fully developed yet in Christian thought. The state always had a religious component to it in history up to that point. It was seen as something necessary for keeping civil order and pursuing the civic good, especially from the pagan point of view, that that the gods were behind the blessing or the protection of the city. Again, the city being the key component of the empire in the world's thinking at that point. So, in a sense, it's almost kind of like a fish in water. Well, of course, the state is going to be involved to some extent in enforcing what is considered right religion. Of course, that was done against the Christians when they were considered to be the false religion by the state. Now, Augustine has a much more nuanced view of this, but I'm just laying that as a foundation. We have to understand our worldview of separation in church and state was not in place at the time. Now, take, for example, the debate, and also I need to say, I don't know what specific text this questioner is referencing, so I would want to see specifically at what they're pointing to. But my closest guess, what they're referring to, is something that emerged out of the Donatist controversy. I won't go too deep into this, but the Donatists were a heretical sect that thought they were the true church because during a time of persecution, their bishops refused to hand over scriptures to the Roman authorities as a kind of denial of Christ, whereas those that did and then later continued in Christ and continued to be leaders in the church, they thought those people were unworthy. They called them, they were the traitors, because it came from the word meaning to hand over, traditore. And so these were traitors that you could not have fellowship with them again. So the Donatists thought they were the true church. But what's also going on in here, the Donatists seem to be much more popular with the lower classes. And you have periods in this time where there's a lot of economic strife that leads to political unrest. At the same time, the Donatists seem to be allied with a group called the Circumcellions. This was a crazy group of people that thought the highest good was being a martyr. So they would actually go attack soldiers, judges, and just travelers on the road with clubs. They called their clubs Israelites.
Wait,
they
what?
wouldn't use bladed weapons.
They
use bladed weapons because Peter said, Peter was told to put his sword away by Jesus.
They called their clubs
they would attack
Israelites?
People with clubs. Their whole what?
They called their clubs Israelites?
They called their clubs Israelites, and they would just attack random people and authorities with the hope that they would be killed.
And these
be martyred.
are people who identified as Christians?
Yes.
I've heard of Donatists. Almost any church history you take, you got to learn about the Donatists.
Right.
And I've also heard of some Christians having a preoccupation at the time with wanting to be killed by the state. But I've never heard of the specific thing of what you're talking about.
This was a group in North Africa, and the Donatists at some point seemed to have some, at least tolerance or alliance with them.
Wow!
And Rome was like,
it's like in Rogue One, Forrest Whitaker's character, that radical wing of the rebellion or something. Go ahead.
Exactly. And so, of course, the state, the emperor wants to suppress these people because they're a threat to public order and public good. And to a certain extent, the Donatists get painted with this brush as well. But now the Donatists were also involved in civil uprisings, which would lead to mobs and killings. To be fair, Christians were part of the Orthodox or the Catholic Church. What was considered to be what we would think of as the church that Augustine identified as the true church. There were Christians that were associated with that church that were also involved in mob attacks on people.
I have read there are times where the Christians wild out. It wasn't only being persecuted, even though it was primarily that there are times where Christians wild out and mob activity sometimes. Right.
So the point is there is a lot of this civil unrest that's happening. And it's connected to religious ideas, and the Roman government, they need to create order. Now, for example, one of the other things that happens is the person that City of God is written to, Marcellinus, he's asking for a response. These pagans are saying that Rome was sacked by the barbarians because we left our gods, and this is because he's trying to convert this Roman proconsul Volusianus to Christianity, and this is a response coming from this pagan. No, it's Christians are the reason that we have all these terrible things happening to us. Well, so his friend is coming to him. How do I respond to this man? This Marcellinus is involved in the suppression of the Donatists, as Augustine is. And at one point, there's another rebellion that occurs by the governor of North Africa against Rome, and it's put down. But the Donatists accuse Marcellinus falsely of being involved in this, and they have a Roman general basically arrest and execute him falsely, and then it comes out later that he was falsely accused. And so the City of God is in a sense kind of a tribute. It starts off with answering his question. In the end, Augustine says this is recompense for this undeserved death. So the point is there is all this strife going on. Now, at one point, Augustine does weigh in from a legal and theological point of view, and he does argue that in the case of heretics, not pagans, not people who don't consider themselves part of the church. Augustine always seemed to be, while he would attack the ideas of pagans, he always seemed to have sympathy for them being trapped in wrong thought, and he was always reaching his hands out to them.
Well, he was one.
He had been one, exactly. And so, as far as I know, there's no instance of him endorsing something like this. But he does argue at one point when the Roman officials are trying to figure out what to do with this situation that's causing all this civil unrest. He does seem to argue from Scripture that the state can use force to compel people to return to the church. He uses the parable of the feast, for example, where the master tells his servants to go out and compel anyone you find to come in. This word compel. And then he also argues, for example, that in a sense Christ compelled Paul when he has his vision that knocks him blind for a while, that this was a kind of compelling force used against Paul to bring him into the fold. Augustine does make these arguments, and it is persuasive. Their side does win the political fight, and the Donatists are suppressed politically by the state. However, there's a persecution that follows of the Donatists, and Augustine himself starts to appeal on their behalf that the persecution is too severe. So I think we can tell from his intent, he's not wanting people to be killed. He does, rightly or wrongly, at that point in his life, seem to want to leverage the power of the state, which was associated with the Christian religion. The state and the church were very commingled at that time. Perhaps some of these events helped him to clarify his thoughts in City of God, where he starts to make this distinction between the city of God and the city of men, not being the visible state of Rome and the visible church, but those that are, so to speak, part of the true church of God, versus those who are not pursuing God but pursuing their own ends in this life, which would include any category of non-believer or people that live for the things of this world.
Right.
Both groups will be separated, in the judgment as the sheep and the goats. Perhaps we see some of that, and there's some. I've read that there's some scholars that still debate to this day whether he rethought these opinions, but it doesn't seem to be clear. It does seem to be the case that in the persecution of Protestants, some of Augustine's thoughts, some of his arguments were used to justify the persecution of heretics and even Protestants later on in the Protestant church.
Right.
Now, again, Augustine warned against people putting him up on a pedestal and not pursuing the truth themselves. Yep. So again, it's complex, it's nuanced. It may be that he was in error on some of these issues, but I'd say even today, good God-seeking Christians wrestle with what is the proper relationship between people of faith and the state, right. And they have different points of views on that.
Yeah, so that comes to larger questions. Well, I appreciate your in-depth knowledge and wisdom on this, brother, and I look forward to seeing you very soon, and everybody in the live chat who's going to be at Doctor for the Block does as well. So with that, guys, give a shout out to brother Rich Astone, and thanks so much, man. It's great to talk to you. It's been a while, man.
Thanks for having me on. God bless.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it.
All
Ciao.
Right, awesome. Yeah, no doubt. All right, switching over to freestyle mode, ladies and gentlemen, and let's see what beat we want to rock here. We got a couple different ones, and let's see if this is one of the ones that. Let me see here. Got some new beats. All right, let's rock this, y'all. Yeah, here we go. Freestyle time. Kick it off. Yo. Back up. Yeah. Back up. Yeah. Back up. Off the mic. Yes, y'all never rock it right. Got a hungry appetite. Keep the beat up now. Know that's right. Yeah. Keep it tight like a alpha flight in the middle of the night. Start from black. I spark the back. I rap from here to Japan. People out, shout to the man Rich. He's like Jackie Chan with the language. People out now in anguish. What do we do? We're suffering well. Sometimes on earth it's like hell. What do we do? Offer elements. I grab this beat and the instrument for the heck of it. I'm like an elephant, stopping on a beat for a bit. In a minute, I spit it, I rip it, I whip it. I'm not a frog, so I don't dare rivet, but I hit hot with the real culture. Swoop down, not like a vulture, but an eagle for the people in the steeple. This is a sequel. Danny Glover and Mel Gibson lead the weapon. Now I'm ripping with the pen. That's my perspective. Grab the beat, now it's an elective. Yeah, like it was a class. Keep this out now, you know we smash like a Mario Kart. We all on bananas. Back in the day, rocking bananas. and it's red and blue, but no Pyro. Vocab Malone and the crew coming through. Mic check, mic, 1, 2. Hello, how you do? It's nice to meet you. Stick to the beat like it was with glue. This is how we do. I'm not a ghost. Boo! I'm not no fool. Back in the day, I was chilling in school, playing a prank, not smoking a dank. A Vocab Malone, you know I spank this beat like it was a redhead stepchild with the freestyle. Never make it so wild. Justice in the back, the dude is chilling, taking a nap. I spit these facts from the dome. They call me Mr. Vocab Malone. Chilling in the home, Mr. Studio. Yes, yes, y'all. Coolio. It's a fantastic voyage. Y'all, sometimes I get annoyed at the voyage. What's that mean? I don't really know. I said it from here, know what I mean? I guess it's a foreign type of word. I messed up now. Dude was a nerd. Rich Astone, Vocab Malone. On the microphone, spit this phone. Phoenix, Arizona, once again it's on. Got you on the block, on the telephone. To your computer, see the future. Next week you'll be there, I'll put ya out the live chat. If you acting all whack, from the white and the black, from the front and the back. Yeah, we spit it hot for the black. This was a shot. That was dope. Right, Doc? We'll do one more and we'll fade out on that beat, because that was fun. I actually don't know what that word means. I used a word I don't know. I don't think I can rap to this one. So I'm going to play it, and if I can't rap to it, it's just going to be the freestyle outro, because I don't think I can rap to this. Justice, what you doing, boy? I don't know what he's doing, y'all. He's acting kind of weird today. I probably can't really do nothing with this one, y'all. Kind of a dope beat, though. It's just not really my style, you know? You know what? I think I'll call it a day. Shout out to y'all. See you, Doctor for the Block. There's going to be a lot of premieres dropping. I'm going to go live, but not on YouTube tonight. In about 3 hours, either on Periscope or in the Christian Hebrews Light discussion group, and I'm going to be discussing 1 Peter 3:15, Apologia. So just check my social media for that if you don't follow me on there. But y'all, God bless, much love, shout out, check out the beat, enjoy it. Yeah, you know what I'm going to do? Put up that Doctor for the Block flyer. You guys digging the beat, huh? I can tell you are.